Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Your Blank What Now podcast with Marcy Nettles. I am so excited to have each and every one of you here with us today because this show is all about people that have gone through some pretty tough things. They've made decisions and they've broken through. And I know that there is so many of you out there right now that are going through challenging times in your lives. And maybe you're like, what in the heck do I do to get out of this one? Well, listen in, listen close, because our guest today just might give you a tip or just the next right step to do to help you too. So I'm excited to introduce you to Melissa Judd. Melissa is a mother of two, a certified life coach, cognitive behavior coach, and trauma practitioner. With a resilient spirit, Melissa not only conquered the challenges of surviving childhood trauma, but also triumphed over an eating disorder. Through her unique blend of personal experience and professional expertise, she guides people on a transformative path, sharing insights on resilience, mental well-being, and the profound impact of overcoming adversity. Melissa brings inspiring stories, expert advice, and a compassionate perspective on navigating your healing journey. So I am so excited to welcome Melissa to the show. And together we decided the title of her episode would be You're Anorexic After Child Abuse. What Now? Melissa, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You are so very welcome. I would really love it if you could start off by really kind of sharing with the What Now tribe more of who Melissa is and what was your childhood like?
Okay, so when I think of who I am, I think of a dreamer, an empath, someone full of kindness, and it took me a long time to work that out. As a child, I was creative. I was always rescuing, dead birds and, that sort of thing. My mum was a nurse, so I thought she could bring dead animals to life. So I was always a creative little soul, very much an introvert as a child. I had young parents and we grew up I was born in the mid to late 70s and then predominantly grew up in the 80s in my earlier childhood. And things were very different there. I had a great childhood in lots of aspects as far as all my needs were met in a lot of ways, but then there was a lot of needs that went unmet, which is not unusual of that generation, which was being able to communicate your feelings and talk about things that were going on. And there wasn't a lot of avenue for you to be very different. It was all about fitting a certain mold and wanting to fit in. And I remember always feeling like I didn't quite fit. Yeah, and so that was always a bit tricky. So there was a lot of masking going on when I reflect back on my childhood. A lot of just being who I thought people wanted me to be instead of just truly embracing who I was. Um, so yeah, it was interesting. Yeah.
Well, could you share just maybe an experience that would help us understand a little bit better what it felt like or what you mean that you didn't quite fit? Do you have an
Mm.
example of that?
Yeah, I think one thing that really stands out to me is in preschool, I remember all of my friends were boys. I found it a lot harder to connect with girls for some reason. And then going into kindergarten, we lived in a very small town, so everyone knew everyone. Going into kindergarten, I observed all of these female friendships and wanted to be part of it, but didn't quite know how. And so I would just kind of sit to the side and listen to the conversations and listen to the play, and then just I think, kind of mimic that, like whatever the girls were interested in, I would say I was interested in. And I would just do whatever I thought I needed for them to like me,
Yeah.
because I just felt, I think looking at it through an adult lens, I think it was a case of not feeling like who I was right or enough. But as a kid, you can't quite articulate that. So you just feel like you're different. You feel like everything comes easy to them. And I felt like that stuff was trickier for me. That's probably the best way I can explain it.
Well, thank you for that. And by the way, as you're sharing that, and I'm glad I asked that because I'm like, yeah, that was me too. That was me
Mm,
too. So I bet that we have other people that are listening right now that are like, yeah, I felt that exact same way. And those are the masks that you were mentioning too, is that you go into an environment to where you really want to be a part of it, but there's something back there that's telling you, this
mm,
just is not, your game, or this isn't your place to really
yeah.
fit in. That's so interesting. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that. So as we mentioned in the title of this episode, we mentioned anorexia.
Mhm.
First of all, will you explain what anorexia is so that the audience that's listening, they can know exactly where we're going with this? And then I would love to know what you think led to you experiencing anorexia.
Yeah. So anorexia is a very complex, layered mental health condition. It's, as we know, with mental health conditions, they're all just symptoms of trauma and stress. And so anorexia is about control. And for me, it was about, because everyone's journey is slightly different. So I'll just speak to what anorexia was for me. It was about never being good enough, never doing enough. It was restricting food to have some sense of control. It was over exercising, like a serious exercise addiction. It was being very focused on my appearance being the only thing that I had. Um, it was all around what size I was, how much exercise I could do, how little I could eat. And then I started sort of experiencing some binging and purging, bulimic type behavior as well. Um, and so it's a disease that is very hard to understand. And from my experience, I mind you, it was 25 years ago, so things have come a long way, but it was still very much about just getting the weight on the person and not overly looking a lot deeper. And I've come to realize that gaining the weight isn't a solution. Like, it's part of the solution. But for me, towards the end, it wasn't even about my weight. I didn't even know what I weighed. It was about just that driver, that inner critic, just driving that competition with yourself to do more than you did the day before, eat less than you did, always punishing yourself.
Okay, so when we're talking about anorexia, and especially with what you just said there at the end of your explanation, was that it wasn't really about the weight. It's not about the weight. That's not the most important thing, but that's just the physical aspect. That's just how it shows up. And so putting the weight back on, yes, is very important for you physically for wellness aspect.
Mm,
Yet when it comes to the mental health or the psychological, the mental aspect of it, if you don't address that,
mm,
then you're not going to really be able to help someone heal.
mm.
So, where do you think this came from for you? Where did this breakdown in your psychological thought process that led to anorexia start?
So I think there was a lot of things for me. Obviously, yes, I'm a survivor of childhood trauma that I suppressed. So during my childhood, I was sexually abused and suppressed that and told to keep that down. And I think for me, what that created was a sense of not wanting to be in my body, or not, just that. I remember this feeling of wanting to crawl out of my skin. And so I think, on reflection, when I look back, I think that sense of not feeling comfortable in my body made me focus on my body. It's really hard to explain. And it felt like, for me, if I could be perfect in some way, then everything would be okay. And for me, perfection looked like having the perfect body or body type or being the perfect weight. And then it just became like an obsession, like a really, really chronic obsession. Um, and obviously there was depression and anxiety in amongst that. I was also diagnosed with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. So it became almost a bit like, well, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, was the eating disorder that created the anxiety and depression, or was the anxiety and depression also symptoms of trauma manifest into the eating disorder? Um, but definitely underlying trauma was the driver. And because the anorexia really took hold when I started getting flashbacks.
Mhm.
So I started getting flashbacks at 20 years old, and nothing made sense. And so the anorexia really kicked up then, because it was like, I need some sense of control over what's happening in my brain and my body. And then that sort of continued until I really was hit rock bottom weight-wise, physically, and was hospitalized at 23.
Wow. Okay. So you mentioned, first of all, the time period that you were raised. During that time period, there was a lot of stuff that would happen inside of households that it was like we just handle it within the home and within the family, and you don't get the outside help. And so the people that really hurt was the children that were involved. And with what you talked about experiencing, those are abuses where you have no control as the victim. You
Yes.
have everything stripped from you. And so I can completely see how it would progress into a form of control in anorexia, because you are controlling everything when it
Yeah.
comes to that. It's not a positive control. It's not something that's good for you, but it is something that I can control this. I can't control what happened to me. I can't control how it was handled. And yet it spiraled so far out of control for you that you ended up being hospitalized.
Yes.
Wow. 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 And thank you so much for being willing to share your story, because I will tell you that I know that there are a lot of other people out there that are experiencing very similar things, with flashbacks from their childhood, from trauma they've experienced, and not knowing how to handle it. And you sharing your story is going to help them understand there could possibly be a better way than
Definitely.
to fall into this type of a mental illness with. And I've always heard of it as being an eating disorder, but it's so much better for us to call it what it is.
Mm,
It's a mental health crisis
it is.
for someone.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's like I said, it's not even about the food
No.
or
And it's
the weight. It's a mental health crisis.
wow. That is just like a
Yeah.
mind blow situation right there, because it really just clicked for me. So okay, so you found yourself in the hospital. Well, first of all, having these flashbacks that led to this serious um, health concern. You're in the
Mm.
hospital at the age of 23. What happened and how did it progress? How did you start to heal, or did you really start to heal then?
Wow. It was, so I remember one thing about anorexia is it really creates a behavior of, the only way I can explain it, and I hope I don't offend anyone, but I behaved like a petulant child. Like, it actually made you behave quite immaturely. And there was lots of, tantrums, and lots of, because of the stress, right? Because of you were, your nervous system's flooded. So I can only describe the behavior of a petulant child. In the first, I think, 3 weeks that I was in there, I remember the day mum and dad dropped me there, and I was living in a small town called Cootamundra in Australia, and they dropped me to our capital city, which is Canberra, at the hospital there. And I got checked in, and they had to leave. And I hate winter. And I was sitting on my bed, and it started snowing. And I remember just looking out the window thinking my whole life was just what does it come to? And so I was behaving like someone that didn't want to be there for the first few weeks. I was exercising in the bathroom. I was hiding my protein shakes. I was doing all the things wrong to still maintain that sense of control, because at that stage I still hadn't given over. I hadn't made the decision. And it was more or less I was too tired to fight everyone on it. So then what happened was I got pulled up. There was this nurse that I really intensely disliked, but he ended up saving my life. So he made me sign a contract. And we had all of these rules. I was basically put on bed rest because I was still losing weight in hospital. So I was put on 24-hour bed rest. I was allowed to get up once every hour to use the bathroom. I was allowed in the bathroom for 5 minutes. I was allowed to go to the dining room for meals. I was allowed to participate in any non-exercise forms of activities, because I was taking myself off to the gym and everything. And yes, and I hated him. But on reflection, he saved my life. And so I begrudgingly followed those rules. And then I remember one night, I've told this story quite often, but it's quite pivotal because I always think that healing comes from a decision. It doesn't just happen. And you can sit in front of a therapist for years, like I did, and still not heal. So one night, I remember they brought my supper in, and my supper was an apple. And I remember absolutely panicking. I just was like, I felt like I'd eaten so much that day and I was feeling uncomfortable in my body. And they brought me in this apple. And I just remember crying, staring at this apple. And so I just sat with the apple in my hand on my bed, exactly like I'm sitting now with my legs crossed. And honestly, it was like, I guess what I would say now was my higher self. But honestly, it was just like this little voice said, Melissa, what are you going to do? Are you going to keep doing what you're doing and stay in hospital for the rest of your life? Or are you going to pull your socks up, do as you're told, and get better and live? And in that moment, I remember thinking, I want to live. I want to live. And so I thought, okay, so I got my journal out and I journaled every single bite of that apple as to why it was okay, how it was going to help me. And so in that moment, I made a conscious decision to get better. And I won't say I never looked back, but I did really start to heal from that moment on. I really took on the therapeutic processes. I learned to meditate. I really started to look after myself and physically heal. And it was just from that, I guess it was like a sliding doors moment. And I was just sitting there on the bed feeling like I had nothing left to other than to get better.
Yes. Okay, listeners. What now, tribe? Major, major, major tip right there. You have to make a conscious decision, because everything that has happened up until now, whether it was in your control or not, does not have to define your future. But you have to make that conscious decision that you are going to own everything from this moment forward and do whatever it takes to get what you want and to be who you want to be.
Yeah.
That was gold right there. So thank you so much, Melissa, for saying that, first of all. And I hope that the listeners are really grabbing hold of that and just like, okay, I'm going to make some different decisions today. I'm going to do something different. So after you made that conscious decision, and I love that you journaled every single bite about why it was okay, why it's good, because you're changing your brain, right? You have to change the way you're thinking. So what did your recovery look like from that point forward? And did you feel like you had everything that you needed at that point to be able to be successful in your healing or not?
So my recovery, when I reflect back, I definitely recovered in stages. So the weight recovery, so gaining the weight, and physically, I was in hospital for 3 months, and I was released at still a very low body weight, but just inside the safe sort of zone. So I guess with my food things and with the exercise, I'd made a lot of progress. Um, I was eating well, and I was doing, very minimal, healthy amounts of exercise. And that was really good. And so I basically, at that point, I thought I was home and hosed. But on reflection, knowing what I know now, we hadn't even covered any of the trauma or the mental health stuff. And I think that's what was missing. And like I said, I'm not blaming anyone because it was 25 years ago. The psychoeducation wasn't there. So no one sat me down and said, well, I know you're here, but what happened here? And no one educated me on the connection. And explained the connection, that whatever happened here is creating this. So I was still completely unaware, and I had done a lot more repressing. And so I sailed through for about another probably 10 years, in what I would call high functioning sort of anxiety. I had children. I lived with postnatal depression with both the children, but I was surviving. I was existing, but I still hadn't really gotten to the root cause. And then finally, in my early 30s, it got to a point where I thought, I really need to address this. I need to address the elephant in the room. So I verbalized what had happened to me, and I made peace with what had happened to me, if that makes sense. Like I accepted it. I admitted it. Up until that point, I was still in denial. And so once I accepted what had happened, I was able to then start healing that part of myself. And that was a combination of a lot of things. I believe in a whole body type process, like talk therapy, but also things like energy work. Like I had a lot of Reiki, a lot of womb healing. I did talk therapy. I did trauma therapy, which I'm now qualified in, and started speaking about what had happened. And that was really what helped heal, was bringing that monster out to the light and saying, I'm not scared of you anymore. I'm not ashamed of you. You're just there, and you just walk beside me, but you don't own me. You don't define who I am. And once I did that, that's when I felt like I'd fully healed. So really, in essence, it was about a 20-year journey, to be
Wow.
honest. Yeah, for me. I'm not saying that it is for everyone, but for me, it was, but lots of growth along the way, to get to sort of where I am now.
Yes. Well, facing your giants sometimes take a long time. It takes a lot of growth. And as you
Mm,
grow in one area, then you open up a whole new other area that you've got to grow in to be able to really become that victorious person and take back your power. And I
yes.
love that you said that talking about it helped you, because I truly believe that stories can save lives. For the person that's been through something, sharing it is healing. And for
Mm,
the person that listens, they can see something that maybe they could, put into their own life to be able to make a difference in what they're experiencing. So I love that. Such great, great information there. So you learned a lot of lessons, I'm sure, as you were
I
going through
did.
this. Do you have any
Yep.
top lessons that you'd like to share?
Okay, so my top lessons are, like I talked about before, you need to decide. You need to make a full body conscious decision. Um, then you also need to accept what is. Acceptance is so powerful. Acceptance doesn't mean giving up. It just means giving over to what is. And then getting to a place of acceptance and then moving forward. So whenever we're not accepting where we are, we're actually denying our own reality. So we need to accept it for all its ugliness and for all the whatever, just accepting where we are at is really, really powerful. It's not weak to need help, and you're not being dramatic by sharing your story. Your feelings matter. That was a huge one. You matter. You matter, and your feelings matter. It's not weak to speak up. And even if you can't, the biggest thing with trauma is our memory doesn't get stored very well. So memories can come in flashes. They can also feel like a dream. And still to this day, I couldn't tell you from A, B to C exactly every step of, it's not like a movie, but I know viscerally, and I know what happened. And so I think a lot of people tie themselves in knots, needing to know the detail and needing to know a clear picture, and you may never get that. So just know that what your body is telling you is correct, even if you don't remember it conducively or in clear pictures. Your body knows.
Yes.
So listen to that and heal that, because a trauma is held in the physical body.
Yes. Yes. All trauma leads to some sort of a physical breakdown.
Yeah.
That is so important for everybody to know. And one of the things that I've learned through my own trauma and my own healing is that a lot of the times what happened to us, it happened in that moment of time. And then what we have done to it over the years since, we've compounded it in, things that we may have added to it because of the emotions that we have wrapped up in it. And we have made it this whole different beast than it actually was. And I think that's another reason why it's so important to make sure that we're not trying to do this on our own, that we have someone else that is qualified and experienced to help with that trauma work. And I know that you said that you're certified in trauma work. So can you share exactly what your experiences with your childhood trauma, your anorexia, and your healing, what it's led to and what you're doing now?
So I came across a very unique therapeutic process called the Richard's trauma process. And it just felt like the missing key to what I needed. So I started exploring it from a professional perspective, because I felt like I wasn't able to really get to the crux of a lot of things with my clients. And at the time, I felt in myself, I felt quite good. But to qualify for the training, we had to go through the process ourselves. And wow. So yes, I was a lot, I was well and a lot better, and I was doing well, but then I went through the process. So we call it TRTP. It's a 3-step process for a client using what we call dynamic reimagining, to basically, because the little parts of us that get stuck in that time and space need saving. So we use a tool called dynamic reimagining to basically go in and get them out of there and let them know that it's over now, you're safe. So we empower the client, we get them the hell out of there, and then we create the new future with our subconscious and our conscious mind on the same page. So they're not fighting each other. So we remove the emotional charge from the events. We can't change the events, but I can, as you saw, I can talk about my sexual abuse like I'm talking about a shopping list. So we take the emotional charge out of the events for the client, by using dynamic reimagining, which for the listeners, it's I guess similar, but it's not hypnotherapy, but in the same vein, using the imagination, the subconscious, because what we ritually imagine, the body and the conscious mind believe. So it's a very unique and powerful process. And I think it's just started dipping its toes in the US, actually, as far as practitioners. But that was a game changer for me. And so doing that myself and then offering that to clients has been incredibly powerful to help resolve the trauma at its root cause, not just putting band-aids on it by managing the symptoms.
Yeah. So I know you've done this with several people. Is there any way that you could give us like an example of what that would look like? You can, I
Yeah,
mean, obviously you don't tell us who it is or anything like that because
yeah,
we know
yeah.
those protections.
So
But
what it looks like, one particular young lady came to mind. She came to me. I had sort of done some speaking with her. She was um, very sort of active in the mental health space and spoke a lot about her story of anxiety and had lived with chronic crippling anxiety for, I think, about 15 years at the point she came to me. And I was very hesitant to actually work with her because I do like, we're always told to stay within the realms of our expertise. And with not being a clinician, I do sort of try and stay within my and refer on. So I was slightly hesitant, but we had a really good rapport and she trusted me. And so I spoke to my mentor, and my mentor said, you can do this. You can work with this client. And this girl was living with what's called emetophobia, which is also a fear of vomiting, and so would avoid things that might even create her feeling sick. So she couldn't drive anywhere like long distance because she might get car sick. She was very fearful and living in this tiny little bubble. She was severely underweight because of the anxiety. And we went through her story of and looked at the patterns that she had had throughout her life and her significant stressful events, because there's never just one, there's always a lot. And sometimes it can be events that you don't think are that bad. So for this particular girl, her father had gotten deployed when she was quite young, and there was a lot of separation stuff there. And so basically we empowered her because her anxiety had become her. So we empowered her um, to be able to separate herself from her anxiety. We then went in and took the emotional charge out of the events that were running the program for her. And then it's incredible. Like we then looked at, well, what does my future look like without this? She left a toxic relationship. She gained 10 kilos. She moved from the hometown that she'd always kept getting drawn back to and was too scared to leave. She's thriving. I still follow socials and have contact. She's thriving. She's living in a different place now. She's got this amazing job. She's traveled everywhere and she is living her best life.
I love that. How rewarding is that to be able to help
It's
someone actually
incredible.
move into a thriving life?
Yeah, it's incredible.
I love that. Okay, so you had mentioned it's not like hypnotherapy; it's more like an imagining. So
Yeah.
is your clients fully awake and aware of what you're doing as you're
They
doing
are,
this?
they
Okay,
are. So
great.
they're in a relaxed
Yes,
state.
yes.
But they can have the eyes closed, the eyes open. They're in um a relaxed state, but they're not in any sort of trance state. They're in a full power position because it's quite a powerful process. And they are fully aware and in control. And you can stop and start too at any time. It's quite incredible. And it sounds a bit like when you describe it, it's like this sounds so crazy, but it's powerful, it's incredible, it's amazing what the imagination can do. And
Yes.
when people say, oh, they don't have a very good imagination, what we say to them is, if you're living with anxiety, you have a very good imagination because you are constantly imagining the worst case scenario in every case. So we reframe for people what imagination looks like. And there's only a very small amount of people in this world that literally can't. It's like 1% or something. There's Antiphasia, it's called. I think that's the right term, where people can't imagine, but that's such a small snippet. We can, as a society, imagine. We just need to harness it, need to know how, and then be guided by the practitioner. And we use different scenarios depending on different events to take the person in, empower them, and get them the hell out of there. It's over
Yes.
now. Reintegrate. It's over now. You're safe.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay. So that is so good. Thank you for clarifying that, because I know that, I mean, there are some religious beliefs behind hypnotherapy and people don't
Mm,
believe in that, or there is, I mean, we're talking about people that are having trauma responses. And so they're feeling like they need to be in control. So to give up that much control to go into hypnosis, I think
yeah.
that that would be a big aversion for many. And so as the listeners are listening to what you're sharing, I want them to know that's not a barrier. That's not
That's
something
not.
that anybody needs to be concerned about if they are considering reaching out and working with you. Because
Yes.
I know people personally that hypnotherapy is just not something that they are willing to participate in. So I love what you said about the power position, putting them in a powerful position to be
Yeah. It's all
victorious.
about empowering. Yeah.
Yes, it's so good. Okay, so even though you do all of this empowering things with other people and you've been through this yourself, I have to ask, what are your greatest fears?
Oh, so I love talking about this because I like calling myself out on my own bullshit.
It's important that
um,
we do that. It's important.
Yeah. So I've recently in the last 12 months moved from a fairly regional inland town to a major city. So I'm now in Sydney and in Australia. And oh my goodness, the imposter syndrome. Who am I? Who am I to be speaking on this? Who am I to be creating programs? Who am I to be getting interviewed by amazing people? I'm just a little girl from the country. I didn't even finish school. I've never stepped inside a university. Um, uh, yeah, all the stories. And I think my biggest fear is someone challenging my authority. Yeah. Someone with their own ego, challenging the work that I do and what I do and the way that I do it because I don't have those letters after my name, or I haven't, studied in the same way that other people have. That has been huge for me, moving to a bigger city and expanding, and using my voice. It's been scary. And also, I think so that's been huge, and I've been working on that. And I also think another fear that runs in the background for me is meeting someone that I can't help. Um, yeah, I do get fearful about that. And that's something that you have to make peace with as a practitioner, because you can't always help everyone. Some people don't choose, they don't decide, they don't want the help. But yeah, that's always a bit of a fear of mine as well.
Yeah. So, okay. So, first of all, we have to address fears. False evidence
Yeah.
appearing real. None of it's real in the first place, right? It's again us using our imaginations to come
Yes.
up with something that has not even happened.
They're
And is
stories. They're
and that
just
it's
stories.
yes, the worst case scenario, right? And for me, I mean, my listeners know that I'm a God girl. I believe in God. And I
Yeah.
believe that if you have a good thing, as in God, then there's also a bad thing, as in an enemy, right? And
Mhm.
in the work that you are doing, you are setting people free from a bondage, right? And so, guess where the enemy wants everybody to be? He wants everybody to be in bondage, right? And so, that's coming against you is because you have such a big purpose.
Mm.
So keep fighting through, girl, because you are amazing and you are doing such great, great things helping people. Because I mean, we've all had trauma in our lives. We've all experienced things negative. And some of us had help in recovering from that early. but the majority of us, especially in our age range, did not. And so we're
No.
figuring that stuff out in our mid 40s into our 50s, right? And
Yeah.
so, I just want people to hear what you're saying is that you can be empowered, you can overcome, and you can heal from that and move forward into who you want to be. So, with that being said, if you could go back to young Melly when you had not yet been through that trauma, if
Mhm.
there was one thing that you could share with her back then, your younger self, what is it that you would say to help her?
Oh, so if this is even pre-trauma.
Pre-trauma,
Okay.
because I truly believe the
Yeah.
trauma is where it all began.
Yeah. So I would say listen to your gut. If it doesn't feel right, speak up. Say no. Say no. Listen to your gut. Because I knew there was a discomfort and I knew, but I was so terrified, and you get so manipulated and brainwashed. So I would say it's okay to say no. It's okay to use your voice because your voice matters.
And you matter.
Yeah.
You matter. Sweet
Yeah.
Melly, you matter. Right? And and that's part of healing too, is going back and talking to our younger selves and letting them know how important they are and how amazing they become, even though they've gone through that stuff. And a lot of the time it's due to going through that stuff.
Yes. Yeah, I always say like my journey was just my apprenticeship to what I do now. I don't ever, it might sound weird with all the stress I've gone through, but I don't look at it through a lens of resentment or hatred, or I just look at it as that was my journey, and it was the only journey I could have had
Yeah.
to do what I do now, because I am here for a bigger purpose. And so that's just the story.
Yeah.
And you don't let it define you. It just becomes something that walks beside you and helps you to help other people.
Amen, sister. You're amazing. You are amazing. So, what is your biggest advice that you would give to anyone that's listening to you today?
I would say use your voice, speak up, reach out. There is a way. Like people they'll find a problem for every solution, right? So people will say, I can't afford it, or I'm too busy, or my husband won't let me, and so it's make a decision. And there is a way. There is so much that I know in Australia. I'm not sure about the US, but I'm sure there would be. There are so many free services for people to gain access as well. But also it's about prioritizing what you want to do, with your money. It's also prioritizing your worth. So I would say choose yourself. Choose yourself, and then make a decision that no more. I'm going to get past this. I'm going to get through this. I'm going to thrive, not just survive.
Amen. Amen. Yes, choose you and use your
Yeah,
voice. Ask for help because there is always help.
there is.
Whether it is 100% free or not here in the United States, I know that there are church programs. I know that there are community services. I know that there are so many different things out there. And you've got Google, so Google it.
Yeah.
Look for it because you're worth it. I love that. Thank you so much for that, Melissa. So, how can the What Now tribe find you and follow you, get connected to learn what you're doing?
So I have my social media platforms, my Instagram, integra.healingco, Facebook, Integra Healing Co. My website is integrahealing.au. I have just recently joined TikTok. That is Judd #2. So all of my platforms, and they all connect back to my contact details, my email, and I'd love to help some people and love to really spread the word that you matter and that you're not your trauma. You can heal
Amen.
from it. Yeah.
Yes, you are fantastic. Thank you so much for that. And we know that you want to help so much that you've actually offered an amazing freebie for our listeners today. So anybody that goes to marcynettles.com freebies and asks for the freebie from this episode, you are actually going to be getting the free gift from Melissa of her Stress Buster ebook. So make sure that you go to marcynettles.com/freebies and ask for that so that we can get it sent right over to you. So Melly, any final words? I know that you have given us so much, but I like to grab and take whatever I can get from my amazing guests for our listeners. Any final words?
Well, firstly, thank you so much. This has been such a beautiful conversation. But I think to the listeners, I think something I've learned along my journey that I implement every day is self-compassion. Give yourself grace. Give yourself compassion. Give yourself grace. And be kind to yourself.
Yes, be kind to yourself because you can't be kind to others unless it starts with you first.
Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
fantastic. Well, thank you for being such a beautiful guest today. I
My
appreciate
pleasure.
you, and I am so excited for the What Now tribe to get to know you better. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Marcy.
You're welcome.